Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG Podcast, episode number 142 of the show. I'm Ramon Mejia, and I'm here to bring you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and of course author interviews. And this week I have 4 new LitRPG titles for you folks at home, and that might not seem like a lot, but some of these books are pretty thick. Before we begin, I want to give a quick shout out to Richard Van Scherpenzeel for making a donation to the podcast via PayPal. Thank you, Richard, for helping to make keeping the podcast going and helping to keep it free and ad-free and all the good stuff. So thank you very much, Richard, for your generous donation. And of course, if anybody else wants to help support the podcast in any way, shape, or form, you can find out all the ways to do so at litrpgpodcast.com/support. Now, for the 4 new releases this week, we're actually going to have 4. It's going to be starting with Transformation Lit RPG. It's a new Russian Lit RPG translation. Tell you what I think about it. After that, it'll be HereAfter, Dragons Rising. Then after that, it'll be Save Point, Upload, Book 1, Sci-Fi Lit RPG series. After that is going to be Dungeon Lord, Abominable Creatures, The Wraith Hunt, a Lit RPG series, book number 3. So most of you probably already read this if you're into the series. It came out a while ago, but I just happen to have a little bit of empty space and wanted to read something I knew I was going to enjoy. So there you go. I'll tell you how I felt about that later. But before we get into that, I'm going to start off into geek news, or Lit RPG news rather. Sorry, other podcast. Okay, there's actually only one story for the Lit RPG news this week. It's going to be for... There we go. The good folks at Soundbooth Theatre have created the official Dragon Seed soundtrack. That's the novel written by James Orson Baldwin, who I've been having a chance to meet recently at a writer's conference in Las Vegas. Nice guy. And apparently Soundbooth Theatre is doing the audiobook narration, but also they created a whole jRPG-inspired music soundtrack, which I thought was pretty awesome. Apparently composed using EastWest Studios sample libraries. Everything they've been sprinkled through the audiobook for Dragon Seed, and hopefully that audiobook will be out any day now, folks. So when it does come out, go check it out, of course. It's not out currently as the recording of this podcast, but decided to play you a little bit of that YouTube video that shows those sounds, and we'll see it. Okay, that's nice. Nice and relaxing, especially the main theme. Okay, a little more exciting. The second track. Okay, that's neat. Okay. Track 3, Dragonflight. Okay, so a lot of this is kind of backgroundish music. The Battling Argus. Oh, this definitely reminds me of Final Fantasy. Yeah, like the battle music. So, okay, let's see. And track 6, Hatchling. Okay, I can see there's a lot of interesting sounds here. Definitely go check it out. It does definitely have this like 16-bit JRPG Final Fantasy kind of vibe to a lot of it, so we'll have a link in the show notes for you to go look up that soundtrack for that particular audiobook. You'll also be able to hear it, of course, if you pick up the audiobook itself. Okay, that's it for LitRPG news. On to Out Now. These are stories that are out now, folks. They came out this last week. Haven't a chance to read all of them, obviously. Otherwise, I'd be reviewing them. But they're out now if you want to go check them out. That includes Barred to the Bone is out. Also is the Third Realm, 10 Books, Realm book number 3 by Michael Chatfield. That one is definitely super awesome, I'm sure. Well, I really enjoyed books. I wanted to go check that one out. In the show notes, I actually have the link for the books to read link, which actually take you to all multiple places. This novel is going wide, which means that it's not just on Amazon. It's not on Kindle Unlimited, unfortunately. But you can buy it other places besides Amazon. So if you like Kobo, if you like Barnes & Nobles, if you like any other place, this link will, in the show notes, will help you to find the place that you can get it at. Also out now is Steel Soul, Hub World book number 1. Also out is A Few Good Minutes More, Sam's Song book number 2. So there you go. So those are all out now. Now on to new LitRPG audiobooks. These are audiobooks that just came out recently. That includes The Arena's Call, Adventures on Brad, book number 4. I feel like I just read that novel a few weeks ago, but the audiobook is already out. So good on Tao Wong for getting those things lined up so nicely. Also out as an audiobook is Restart, Level Up Series, book number 1. I actually really enjoyed this novel. It's a real life LitRPG story. It is not combat focused, but it really just like a slice of life story with the main character who's living his life in an urban city, and how having RPG powers kind of influences that and changes his ability to kind of become more than he used to be. So I enjoyed it. And also as a LitRPG audiobook is Loot Kingdoms, Shadow Edge, a high fantasy digital adventure written by Eden Red. So there you go. So all kinds of stuff. A lot of Eden Red stuff does have adult situations in addition to RPG mechanics and game stuff. So be aware of that. If this is the case with these stories, I believe they are. Upcoming LitRPG now. These are real stories that I know will come out in the near future. And I'll be honest, a lot of the stories I have on this list don't show up on Amazon when you do a search for LitRPG, either on the Kindle store or general all searches. So this to me is probably the best list out there on the internet to find stuff that's actually going to be coming out. And a lot of authors will like give me events and they're saying, oh, I plan to put out my book in the near future on this date. Here's some cover art. Please let people know about it, because otherwise people just don't find them for some reason on some searches on Amazon. So there you go. And that includes Guardians of the Round Table book number 3, Sin Feathers, which will be out on November the 18th. Song of Shadow, Bards of the Barlena book number 2, out on November the 19th. November the 20th, it'll be Island Kingdoms War. That's Evolution Online book number 3. November 22nd, Fate of Camelin, which is the 4th book in that series. November 23rd, Limitless Lands book number 2, A Conquest, a LitRPG adventure. This is definitely one of those examples like, oh, I never find this when I do a general search for LitRPG, even though it says LitRPG in the title. It's really odd. Out on November the 26th, it'll be Guild. This is a new addition to the list. A LitRPG novella in the Monsters, Maces, and Magic book series. This is the 3rd book, but it's a novella apparently. Out on November 27th, Civil War, a LitRPG adventure, the Rogue Dungeon book number 2. Out on November 30th, Eden's Gate, The Omen, a LitRPG adventure. And adding to the list is going to be out on December 1st, the collaboration between Blaise Corbin and Willem D. Rand, Cultivating Chaos, Veil Universe Cultivating Chaos book number 1. There is a pre-order available for that one. So we have all that good information there on the list. Also out on December the 10th, it'll be Hero Level Up book number 2. That's going to be the sequel to the series that just came out as an audiobook. So there you go. Looking forward to reading that one. On December the 15th, Redemption, The Rise of Resurgence, book number 3. December the 16th, Free Haven Online, Winter Dungeon Land, which is the 3rd book in that series. December the 19th, Dungeon Mauling, a LitRPG game adventure, The Good Guys, book number 3. Such long titles. New addition to the list is going to be Michael Antmos, the Dark Herbalist series, the book 4 in that series called Finding a Body. So it looks like that one's getting a new book and it'll be out on December the 27th of this year. So I have something to look forward to around Christmas time, but would have been a late Christmas present, I guess, from the author. On January the 9th, it'll be Level Up Knockout book number 1, which is a set in the same universe as those other Level Up books, but it's a different main character. And this one seems like it might be a little more action focused, out on January the 9th. So there we go, folks. 9th of 2019. Okay, on to new releases and reviews. And any releases and reviews, folks, we're going to begin with the novel called Transformation LitRPG, written by Valery Starsky. There we go. The author was nice enough to let me know that that this title came out. And he's like, it's a Russian translation on Russian, so please excuse my Google English. So he has a nice sense of humor, very funny gentleman. So thank you very much for letting me know that it came out, man. It is 306 pages, $2.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. The familiar world collapsed overnight. As the game transformation progressed, disasters occurred throughout the Earth. Materials changed their properties, new species of flora and fauna appeared, and there was no more electricity. The game was massive, spread across multiple worlds, and when a new planet was added, it was converted into a huge dungeon, completely replacing the previous civilization. However, the aliens' plan for Earth began to go awry from the very beginning. The conversion was less successful than expected, and then An ordinary young man stole the bonus for the first gaming action in the new dungeon, depriving the invaders of their perk. How can he manage the situation? Which of the aliens will become his ally? Which ones are his enemy? Dare they rebel against the all-powerful invaders, regain their land, and even create a new world? So that is the author's description. Again, this is a Russian translation, and sometimes it does show there are some small, semi-regular technical writing issues. It's usually anything that like breaks immersion, but it's like, oh, that's a weirdly phrased sentence. And like, oh yeah, it's a translation. It is what it is. And some phrases from Russian just don't translate well into English sometimes. The author actually, again, he wrote to me, he said that he plans to update the novel soon with a better translation, but for now, this is the version I get to review. So this is a slice of life RPG apocalypse story, which means that the entire world is it's an apocalypse, but it's like an RPG apocalypse. So everything becomes gamified, monsters appear, dungeons appear, but it's still the modern real world, and sometimes with different mechanics added in. In this case, again, it's very slice of life in that you're just following the main character as he does a bunch of stuff. It may be interesting side stories or interesting storylines, but there is no like generally save the world from this evil AI plot or something like that. It's a very, you just follow him out on adventures, and sometimes that's very entertaining. Let's see. The main character, Yaroslav, is caught up in it all when the whole world is transformed by space elves. Yeah, really. He lucks out and gets some early bonuses for first kills and rides that streak of luck as far as it will take him. The story really just follows the main character as he looks into one situation after another, or follows his intuition through his adventures, finding allies, killing his way to power. So that's kind of what the novel is. The game mechanics are shown throughout the story, but they're mostly notification-based. So the main character gets bonus after bonus for his lucky achievements. Much of the power progress comes from this luck and not necessarily from like a hard work on the main character's part, especially early on in the novel. It's explaining the story why he's so lucky, but that doesn't mean the main character doesn't use what he has effectively. So this is one of those, I think, mechanic things between Russian LitRPG and American LitRPG that I've noticed, and that a lot of times in Russian LitRPG, the main character just kind of lucks into a situation, or he follows his gamer intuition, and that becomes the mode in which the plot is progressed, or the in which he gets like these really nice benefits that he'll like use to like the maximum advantage. So he's taking advantage of the situation, yes, but he's not necessarily like grinding experience points or like working really hard, and that like really hard work, like that's the foundation of someone's success. I've seen that more and more in like American LitRPG. Not to say it doesn't exist in Russian LitRPG, but for the most part, like that's a real distinguished character. Like a lot of times in American LitRPG, it's not, oh, he just lucked into this thing and he just keeps following in that luck trail. It's very much focused on, oh, he might have a single benefit, but then he works his butt off to make sure he uses it to the great advantage. And in this case, the story more falls into that same kind of concept of like, oh, the main character lucks out and then he lucks out again and again and again. And it's not like he's not using this luck to his advantage, but that's often in the story in particular, how that RPG progress occurs. And it still occurs in the story. He's not like he's just sitting on his laurels and flipping coins in the air and murdering monsters. He's still working hard. He's still working, I should say. But a lot of like the good things that happen to the main character are just like, oh, luck or intuition. So that'll work for some people, that work for others. Overall in the story, there's good action. There's some interesting storylines, and even a bit of intrigue between like the various alien fantasy factions. But again, some people may be turned off by the lack of like hard work on the part of the main character for his power, or the wandering slice of life nature of the story. Me, I don't mind either. I don't. But that's me. Not everybody likes slice of life, but I had a pretty decent time with it. I like seeing where this Russian story went, and it went to some very interesting places. Like, okay, that's neat enough to follow. Gets a score of 7.1 out of 10. Like I said, entertaining, but I'm like, oh, okay, that's just entertaining enough to get like a good score for me. So it's Transformation LitRPG with a score of 7.1 out of 10. There you go. Okay, next review is for HereAfter: Dragons Rising, written by Derek Rice. It is 269 pages, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. Nash Evers has never played a video game in his life, and he didn't intend to start after death. These days, most people have their minds uploaded to HereAfter when they die and keep living into eternity. For Nash, this means infinite opportunities to grow as wealth and power. A perfect death. That is, until he gets drawn into a game he can't escape, with rules he doesn't understand and stakes he's never imagined. Dragons Rising is the name of the game, and the humble HereAfter citizens fill the role of NPCs in wealthy gamers' VR MMO experience. The experience points to real. The spirits points are real, the magic is real, and the death for NPCs like Nash is real. Nash teams up with his hacker son to try to survive and bring down the corrupt organization that started all this, but it's going to take more than a few potions and some grinding to teach this old dog new tricks. Nash has destroyed men and corporations, even conquered entire nations, but he's never faced anything like Dragons Rising. So there you go, not a bad blurb. It does mostly true. It's mostly true. It doesn't quite expand on everything in the storyline, but it's enough of a tease. There are some good things about the story. I'll start off with that. There is some really nice character development in the story. The relationships and behaviors between the characters feels realistic and interesting. And the well-developed characters are probably the best part of the story. So there you go. Those are good things that I liked about this story. The game stuff, unfortunately, is not one of them. So sorry. While the game stuff is shown throughout the story, and you actually do see the main character's character sheet very early in the novel. It's just like, there are interesting parts about the story for the game mechanics, but a lot of it ultimately ended up not mattering at all, or not being consistent, not actually being math consistent either, or making math sense. And that's unfortunate, because you could tell the author actually had some ideas about some interesting game mechanics for the main character. It's just they didn't really follow throughout the entire story. The main character in the very beginning of the novel dumps all of his stat points in a non-combat stat charm, and then he leaves all the other stats very low. Yet he's repeatedly the badass fighter for most of the story, able to beat monsters many levels higher than him, sometimes double his level. And that doesn't make game mechanic sense, and it doesn't make like math sense. There's about 5% of the story where the author uses a very interesting level of mechanic related to the main character's class, Merchant, which I don't want to spoil for you if you're going to read this, but I thought it was actually the most interesting part of the story, where it's like, oh, instead of focusing on the combat stuff, which he shouldn't be able to do well, you're focusing on his class stuff, and that actually is a very interesting section. But unfortunately, it's a very small section of the story. It's about 5% of the entire novel, and then it's kind of ignored for the rest of the thing, which is, again, disappointing, because I'm like, oh, that I would have really loved to have seen that merchant class stuff earlier, when the main character actually got that class, and seen that be the big mechanic of the story. I think that's a very potentially fascinating storyline. But again, it's not what actually ended up happening, which is, again, disappointing. And most of the stuff, again, RPG stuff, just kind of disappears in regards to the main character. Let's see. Eventually, the game mechanic stuff just kind of disappears in the story entirely. Details start being lost. You start seeing the main character like not using things anymore. And both the main character and the villain in the story are eventually just described in like fantasy terms, where they're like, oh, they're using never before seen powers and abilities. And the game stuff ultimately kind of just like, oh, they're still showing levels, but there's like all the other things that they're doing have no basis in any game mechanics ever shown in the novel. I'm like, oh, that's unfortunate. That is not. Oh well. Let's see. Ultimately, the resolution of the story also occurs by not by any earned levels of powers from the subtly introduced artifacts of power that solve everybody's problems magically or through hacking. So that's unfortunate. The resolution of the story, well, again, overall, the story is well written on a technical level. There's good character development, there's interesting interaction between them, and it's almost enough to carry the story. There are even nice themes of love, loss, redemption, emptiness of wealth, and the sacrifices we're willing to make when we love something. However, again, as I read the story, it's just like, oh, the RPG stuff doesn't matter. And like, there's specific examples I could give you where, like at the beginning of the novel, the main character jumps in health from like 15 to 60 between levels 1 and 2. I'm like, oh, that's a pretty big jump when you consider that the main character almost has no stats and no stat points in anything health related. I'm like, oh, and then as the story goes on, it becomes more evident as that the stats and the levels don't really matter, because there's even a point in the story, and this really bugged me, was that the main character reveals he's been hoarding his stats for like, I don't know, 20 levels or 15, 10 or levels or whatever it is. And he's not been using them at all because he plans to see where he needs to really put them. And he's trying to essentially like min-max his character, which is a perfectly fine strategy, except that between those points, where he stopped applying those points, is like he's been fighting monsters who are like 5 to 10 levels, 5 to 15 levels higher than him, with essentially the same stats he had when he was level 4 and winning. I'm like, that doesn't make sense. And that's kind of where those things like that, they kind of lost my enjoyment. So unfortunately, the VR game rule definitely matters, but none of the RPG rules do, since they're ignored or they're conveniently missing when the story needs to progress in a certain direction. However, if that doesn't matter to you, you might enjoy this more than me, obviously. But for me, you got a score of 6 out of 10. I didn't hate the story. I didn't even think it was boring, but it was just like, oh, I couldn't enjoy it because I'm like, all the RPG stuff I came for doesn't matter, even though it's like it shows up as like words and levels, and you occasionally see some skills and some special powers, whatever. But it's like, oh, that doesn't matter because it doesn't even like it's not consistent through the novel, and it's like, oh, the story is going to go on ignoring those parts of those things that I really love about LitRPGs. I'm like, okay, it just didn't work for me on that respect. So for me, it gets a score 6 out of 10. Hereafter, Dragons Rising with a score of 6 out of 10. So there you go. Okay, next, it's going to be Save Point Upload, book number 1, Sci-Fi LitRPG series, written by Matthew Siege. There you go. Another author, actually. He let me know that this was coming out. He sent us a letter on our podcast email, and he's like, oh, by the way, it's Siege, not Sieg. I'm like, oh, that does make sense. It is spelled the same, Siege. So there you go. Sorry, guys. Sometimes I get your names wrong, but thank you for correcting me. It really does. It's important. This is 450 pages, $2.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. Adam Harris's name has just appeared on a top secret list of extraterrestrial origin. Unbeknownst to him, he's one of a handful of individuals capable of implementing a save point, a static moment in time he's able to revisit over and over upon death. It's a good thing too. Brain cancer was turning into a real drag. The government owns the list though, and they've wasted no time snapping him up. According to them, he has 13 days in an alien realm to learn as much as he can before the inevitable, at which point his memories, skill progress, and weapon proficiencies will endure despite his body resetting. Then it's rinse and repeat. But there are unwritten rules to the game he's about to play, and unseen forces acting in judgment. Adam will have to learn the hard way that dying is the easiest thing he's going to do today. So there you go. Actually, it's a really nice blurb. I'll be honest, this is a weird story. I mean, you look at that cover and you're like, oh, this is definitely weird. And it is. It's a good story. And it's interesting enough that I read all 450 pages in one sitting. But it's definitely weird. And that's not a bad thing. I like weird stories. It's kind of like the Hunger Games. It's like with some super weird aliens, RPG mechanics, and respawns. Like I said, it's kind of weird, but again, it's interesting. So I liked it. On the game mechanics side, things are fairly light. You get to see the main character's stat sheet fairly early, and he gets notifications about new skills and ability he learns as he grows. But the mechanic that really plays a big part in the story itself is definitely the respawn system. That's the core part of the story, and it's used well to dictate the pacing. So good on you, Matthew, for making that an integral part of your storyline. Overall, it's really hard for me to say anything about the storyline because it is so weird, and talking about it all is going to kind of ruin some of the fun of discovering what it's all about and how these other aliens work into it and what this whole system is. It's all very, it's like, oh, okay, multiple times the story as I'm reading, I'm like, this is weird, but I like it. And that's kind of my feeling for it overall. I actually did enjoy it. It feels very slice of life sometimes, but then it just takes some left turn that leaves me scratching my head. Like I said, I liked it. But I like word stories, so there you go. If you like word stories, you'll probably enjoy this too. I get to score 7.3 out of 10 for me. That's Save Point Upload, book number 1, Sci-Fi LitRPG series with a score of 7.3 out of 10. There you go. That's a simple review. Okay, let's see. Our last review is, there you go. It's going to be Dungeon Lord, Abominable Creatures, The Wraith's Haunt, a LitRPG series, book number 3. It is 618 pages, a massive novel with a $5.99 price tag. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. The light strives to purify the kingdom of stray souls from evil, and only Dungeon Lord Edward Wright stands in their way. The heroes of the Milton Church, led by Inquisitor Gallio, scour the forest in search of the haunt, while Ed desperately attempts to uncover the secrets behind the hero's origin. Can Ed and his friends defeat the Inquisition and secure their own place in the world, or are they destined to become the monsters of their own tale? All over Ibalos, the portents announce blood and fire as the ancient traditions return, and abominable creatures, long thought forgotten, stir in their tombs. Both the dark and the light loom hungrily over the hunt, and only one thing is certain. If pushed, Dungeon Lord Edward Wright will fight against them all. So there you go. This is the third book in the series. If you're not on board by now, you've probably stopped reading. If you already looked at this or read this, you probably picked up. And this came out several weeks ago, I believe. And I just haven't had time to devote to 650 pages or 618 pages. It's a big story. But I finally did. Though there are a few translation snags again, the story was entertaining. It expands on the good stuff from books 1 and 2. So the novel continues to get better and better as the series continues on. So I've always liked that about the author's writing. He's continuing to push the good things and make it, niggling small little things that bother me disappear eventually. Personally, I like the moments where the lore of the world was told. It helped to make it feel fuller for me, give context to certain social behaviors, especially with the Inquisition side, especially seeing their point of view in the story as well. It's it's always good to see for me to understand who your villains are and why they're doing things that are, even if you don't agree with them, it's okay, at least I can have some empathy for them and the way that they're doing things. For me, that's a plus. The fights, when you get there eventually, they're good. There are nice, good fights here, but a lot of the story is not fight oriented this time. So just be aware of that. They're also nice to see a change of scenery in the story, and that the real world storyline comes back into play from book 1. It's that's nice to see those characters or that kind of storyline come back. It's that's good. There's still good RPG progress with the main character, Dungeon Lord Powers, and while I'm not a fan of the latest minion edition that he has, it adds some variety between the group having issues among themselves again. So a bunch of good stuff there. It gets a score of 7.5 out of 10 5 out of 10 for me. That's the Dungeon Lord Abomination Creatures, The Last Hunt, a LitRPG series, book number 3. I feel like that title's longer than my review, with the score of 7.5 out of 10. There you go. That's it. We're done. That's the whole episode, ladies and gentlemen. Came in under half an hour this time. That's probably the shortest episode I've had in months. But we're done. That's it. Thanks, everyone. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, on Patreon, on our website, and a bunch of other places. And of course, if you want to support the podcast in any way, shape, or form, you can find all the ways you do so at LitRPGpodcast.com/support. And until we can hang out again, ladies and gentlemen, remember to go read some LitRPG. Goodbye, everybody.